This is a MIDI hack that is so simple, but I think it's so great, and it's like one of those palm to the forehead. I couldn't believe I was overlooking this for so many years when I started using Live. But did you know that there's actually a general MIDI, or GM is what it's abbreviated as? There's a general MIDI format for how drum and percussion sounds are meant to be mapped across a keyboard. If you Google image search general MIDI drum map, you'll find hundreds of images that display this. But the drum rack in Ableton Live actually has this sort of built in under the hood, this general MIDI understanding that we've all sort of come to of how to build up drum kits. And you can find which drum pads on the drum rack, which drum pads are meant to have certain types of sounds on them by simply hovering your mouse over the drum pad. Now I've built up a little dirty garage kit here that you guys can use if you want to play around with this. But I encourage you to make a beat with this and then use the hot swap feature and swap in the other Ableton Live core library drum rack presets. You'll notice that all of the same sounds, kicks, snares, claps, etc., are going to get played by the same MIDI notes that you program in because they all follow this general MIDI GM format. Now again, if you hover the mouse over one of your drum pads here, you can see on the bottom of the screen down here, take a look down there. You'll notice it says C1, that's the note I'm hovering over, the drum pad I'm hovering over. It says the name of the sample I've dropped on it, and then it says GM suggestion bass drum or kick drum 2. If I go to the next one, C#1, name of the sample, and then GM suggestion side stick. I often put a rim shot on this one. Next one we have acoustic snare, then clap, hand clap, electric snare, low floor tom, although sometimes I'll put a second, maybe like a quieter kick. I notice this in a lot of the core drum racks that come with the Live library. They'll do the same thing, put kind of a quieter kick drum there. Then we have a closed hi-hat. Up here on A#1 we have an open hi-hat, and then you've got a bunch of slots. I haven't filled them in yet, but you've got slots for toms, bunch of different tom drums, pedal hi-hat, high mid tom, crash cymbal, high tom, and ride cymbal. And actually if you scroll up and down to the different pages of the drum rack, you'll notice it keeps going. Tambourine, splash cymbal, etc. So if you pay attention to this when you're building your drum kits and don't just do the old thing, I see so many of my students do this where I'll put a kick drum on the first one, and then a snare on the second one, and then a hi-hat on the third one, which is fine, but if you want to have the flexibility of being able to hot swap out entire kits without having to go in and move drum pads around the drum rack, I'm going to undo that. You can follow this GM format and all of your drum kits will be sort of locked in, so you can easily replace the whole kit. So let's just look at a quick example here. We'll play the beat back. And if I hit hot swap now, it's going to take me to, well, these are my presets, but let's go to the core library. So we'll go to packs, core library, underneath drums, and then we've got all our kits here. So let's try throwing in, I don't know, kit core bat2. And you'll notice that's triggering where I have the kick drum programmed in. On the C1, it's still playing a kick drum. Where I have the snares programmed in, it's still playing a snare, etc. Let's hot swap again. What do we got? Maybe 808. 808 kit. Ooh, that sounded nice. So I don't have to go in here and rearrange MIDI notes. I don't have to go over here to my drum rack and start moving these different samples around onto different pads. Everything will just interface nicely with this GM format. Let's go to, that's not bad actually. So a lot of times just by building up your drum kit, following the GM format, you might start going in after programming your beat, you might start going in and hot swapping out the entire kit and then just land on a kit that's totally different that, you kind of like the sound of that. The other thing too is you may land on a whole kit and maybe like only a couple of the drum samples. We'll just keep those and then replace. Remember, you can hot swap individual drum pads as well. Just replace the kick drum back to the kick drum that you had on your previous kit, for example. But this is a great way to start building up drum kits for yourself, saving them as presets, follow this GM format, and then be able to hot swap out entire kits without having to go in and mess around with your MIDI notes or moving the pads around. Another thing that's worth mentioning while we're on this topic is, let me go to the preferences really quickly. Now under the library tab in preferences, you're going to see an option up here that says collect files on export. And I believe, if I remember correctly, the default setting here is going to be always. The reason I'm bringing this up is because if you leave it on that, every time you save a drum kit preset by clicking on this floppy disk button here, not only will it save the state of your drum rack, but it'll also take all of those samples and immediately import them into your current project folder or into your user library. You may not always want drum rack presets to do that. I switched this preference to ask. So anytime I try to save a drum kit, it's going to ask me, we'll get this dialog window popping up, it's going to ask me if I want to save these files directly into my project folder or if I just want to kind of keep them into in the core library. I usually will hit don't copy here. So it's just going to save the state of this drum rack, but it's not going to import all these samples into my project folder, so I just have copies and copies and copies of samples every time I make a new project. So just something to think about. It's very much a personal preference thing, but it's worth knowing so you don't just start overloading your hard drive with copies of samples that you don't really need. My recommendation would be to put collect files on export on ask, but just be aware of that one. But anyway, going back to our GM suggestions here, I hope this one has been helpful. Hopefully you start implementing that, especially if you're big on programming your own beats using the drum rack.